Once again, I'm Kevin Lawyer. I've been blessed to be able to travel around the country and as a part of our sales team for about 8 years.
Okay, my name is David Butler. I've been with Leader about 10 years. I'm with the sales team. You saw me obviously in the video there at Jimmy Brown's Sugar House. I hung my first main line in 1973. So I've got a little bit of experience in the maple industry since then. I do have my own sugaring operation. If there's ever anything you guys want to discuss with an expert, I guess I'm the one to call, or Joel or Kevin. I'd be happy to help you.
All right. My name is Joel Elke. I am the Western Region Sales Representative for Leader Evaporator. I've been with Leader for about 2.5 years now. I am also a sugar maker myself in Wisconsin. I have been tapping trees for 18 years now. I started when I was 8 years old, so I started young, and I've been loving every minute of it.
Okay, so as a group, we're happy to spend a lot of time in the field and to try to pinpoint any mistakes or things that we see that work and don't work. So this morning, initially, we didn't spend a lot of time on it in the video, but you saw an RO machine in the video. That was one of our older machines called an Elite 1000 machine. David, you want to just go over some of the new equipment that we have to offer and what that machine was, and then looking for the future here?
Well, since the Elite 1000 machine, we've gone through some pretty drastic changes in what we make for machines through the Extreme line and now into the MVP line. What we've seen in the industry is a large push, especially for, I'm going to say, smaller or hobby producers, to get involved in reverse osmosis and reap the benefits of reverse osmosis. I want to guess, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 4 years ago we came out with a micro RO line as well. And that's a small hobbyist RO. Gives everybody from 100 taps up the availability to use the benefits of an RO. One of the things I want to state about ROs, it's a very common misgiving. The RO does not chemically change your syrup at all. Okay, when you're using an RO, all you're doing is getting rid of water and making yourself more efficient. One of the things that's been noticed and has been tracked in New England is, and I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but there's something like a 65 or 70% carbon reduction in the maple industry, in carbon given off to the atmosphere in the maple industry every spring. And that's directly attributable to the amount of ROs that are in use today.
Okay, thank you, David. So we saw a few things in that video for how he placed his RO in the room. Joel, can you talk about where to place an RO and the options to get started with an RO machine?
So one of the big things a producer has to remember with an RO is that the RO unit itself cannot freeze in the off season. So in that video, Jimmy had his RO in a separate RO room, which is definitely the recommended way to have your RO set up in a sugar house. It makes the plumbing a little bit more simple because you can have a centralized location for your RO plumbing, but it also makes keeping a small room heated is much easier than keeping a large room heated. A lot of producers have small enough RO rooms that all it takes is a 100-watt light bulb to keep it heated. So small RO room is definitely nice. You want enough room to work in there, but no bigger than that. The other large benefit to having an RO room is the reduction in sound in the sugar house totally. By having your RO in the RO room, it keeps the sugar house much quieter. The RO's got a number of pumps spinning, and those pumps are all high pressure pumps. They create a rather loud whining sound. So it definitely reduces just the overall stress of the day by not having to listen to that sound. So RO in a small RO room that's well insulated is definitely recommended, so that, because of those benefits I talked about.
Yeah, sure. No, I hear you there. It's funny, one thing you forget about when you have an RO machine is, over time pumps, they spin a lot and they start to wear, and they do get a little bit louder, and you kind of forget about that. Some people put them right next to where they're drawing off, and it does get a little bit loud. So, speaking of that, Joel, one gentleman here asked about the use of glycol? And can he leave it as is, or is it necessary that he needs to put glycol in his RO machine? Can you answer that?
So glycol is definitely recommended to put into your RO machine because it helps keep all of the pump seals in good condition. It's not completely unnecessary. You won't destroy the machine in one season by not putting glycol in it, but we highly recommend the use of glycol because it keeps the pump seals lubricated and fresh in that 10 to 11 months a year where that machine sits without running.
Yeah, and one thing to remember as well is, during the, that process, if glycol doesn't mean that if you put glycol in, it is an antifreeze, but it's not designed to leave it out in the cold outside with glycol all winter, especially in one of the northernmost woods there alone. So thank you for that question. David, you were there with him. Can you talk about, starting to look at high concentrate and what that means and what he was doing with high concentrate?
So I define high concentrate, which Jimmy typically tries to go to about 8%. I have other customers that go a lot higher.
Yeah, just the process of getting started with high concentrate and what he's doing and then where you can go.
So with the standard equipment we have, the MVP line or the extreme line, it's pretty simple to go to 10 or 12, maybe 15 or 16%. The major concept that people have to think of when they're trying to do that is not necessarily the absolute concentrate they're getting out of the RO as much as the water they're getting rid of and the fuel they're not burning to produce an equal amount of syrup. Running an evaporator with 12 to 15% concentrate really doesn't make that big a difference as long as you're prepared for the extra syrup coming out of it. The evaporator is going to boil exactly the same. Your depths are going to stay the same. Your floats are going to work the same. You're still going to have to defoam on a regular basis, but you're going to make a lot more syrup per hour than you were used to before. So that's going to become your first bottleneck is what do you have for a filtering process? What can you do with that finished syrup when you get done?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does change the operation when you start, like David said, once you start getting into that high teens, it drastically changes the operation. You look at a 43-to-1 average, that's 43 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup. You move into 8% from that starting point, and that's 3/4 water removal. It's a big difference in the evaporator. It affects the whole process. But thank you, David, for that. So looking at that overall and getting into RO machines and thinking about sizing, Joel, can you explain, if you're thinking about getting started, what tap counts work for what size machines, and where do you think you go from there?
So as David mentioned, we have a number of different machines available, and the tap count that you want for the different ROs kind of depends on what you're looking to do as a sugar maker. That being said, we have recommendations for different sized ROs. So the Micro 1 and Micro 2 are our smallest ROs. The Micro 1 RO, you're probably going to want 100 taps or so to start with. The Micro 2, probably about 200 taps. And those ROs can be good for a large number of taps. I work with a producer in Wisconsin that cooked for 1,400 taps this year running a Micro 2 RO. That RO has to run long hours, but the machines can run a lot of hours a day. And you can, be very efficient with those machines. That being said, I ran a few more taps than that this year. I used a single post 8-inch machine, would be similar to what our MVP Eco is. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. I don't have the time in the day to run my RO all day. So I definitely need a bigger machine. So when we start, we got to make water fast so we can get boiling and get things done. So we're not in the sugar house every day till 2 o'clock in the morning. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. The one thing you do want to remember with some minimum tap count with ROs is you need to generate enough water in your ROing session to rinse the machine at the end of the day and wash the machine up. So if you are, say, on the lower side of the tap count for your RO, you may need to keep sap. If you have a low flow day, you may not be able to run every day, or you may need to keep water back from the last time you ran your RO so that you can have enough water to desugar that machine, rinse it, and wash it. It's just something to be cognizant of. You can never have too much rinse water. So having a big tank that you can hold water back for situations where you do want to run a short day is definitely a good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we have, like Joel said, we have a variety of sizes to offer, from the small 100 tap producer all the way up into large producers. We've got various options all the way through to size you correctly. But there's one person just asked a question that a little bit to David here, and to syrup flavor. And we've gotten this question over the years many times. And good tasting syrup still needs time over the flame. And I do want to mention something that I usually will tell people when I have a group, and that's that for a long time. We just had so many comments about the change in the industry overall with RO machines, and I kind of like to say it in a way that to the old barbecue guys. If you're starting out and you've never used an RO machine overall, in this case, if you're a barbecue guy and you got to have barbecues, that barbecued meat takes all day. It's fantastic meat. It's excellent. It takes you a lot of time. It's a lot of labor. When you get done, you have this beautiful, platter of meat. That's great. An RO machine is a lot like a grill. It doesn't make bad food. It's fantastic food. It doesn't take all day because most of us don't have that time. It's still good syrup. It's fantastic syrup, but it's just a different process. So it's kind of like barbecuing all day versus grilling at night when you don't have the time. So there's no question that caramelization time can affect flavor, but from what we've seen over the years, the industry has certainly shifted. David, do you want to answer anything further there?
So in a perfect world, if I get brought in at the beginning, or Joel or Kevin would get brought into the beginning, and we can advise people, we like to match the RO speed with the evaporator speed so that you're running both machines at the same time, and both machines at the same time at your target concentration level. Okay, Kevin mentioned real quickly that time over heat is still your flavor development and your caramelization. You can play with those a little bit. You can adjust the time as long as you increase the heat. If you increase the time, you can decrease the heat. So back and forth one way or the other. And we can play with those numbers as we set up operations. As far as flavor, historically, ROs I'm going to be honest when I say this, and maybe I shouldn't, maybe it's the wrong thing to say. Back in the 70s and 80s, when ROs were coming in, people did damage their flavor. We didn't know how to run the RO technology. It was all just brand new coming into the industry. Unfortunately, that has kept pace with the industry today, and people blame ROs for bad flavor. No, the flavor, there's so many other variables in flavor, from tanks to the pipeline you're using, or bucket you're using, or how many times you pump it. Do you clean your pump? Do you clean your overhead tank? Do you clean your flue pan? Do you clean your steam away? There's so many other variables involved there that the RO is very, very, very safe to use. Okay. One thing we do that Joel mentioned that I want to stress. We do use some not real nasty chemicals, but bad flavored chemicals. They're not nasty in the environment, but they are bad flavored to clean that membrane. You have to make sure and manage your permeate water so that you can make sure to rinse those chemicals out of the RO completely. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes new people do, is they try and cheat that amount of water, and they might not get the chemicals out of the RO completely.
Yeah, we'll talk about cleaning as we get going here. I do want to answer a question though from a gentleman here. And this is for you, Joel, what is the minimum tap count for a single 8x40? So that would be a single post RO machine. 8x40 is the standard for size, and that's 8-inch by 40-inch. And he asked, is 1,000 enough for water? Can you go into not only permeate, and then again, with RO machines, permeate is a term we use for demineralized water. It would be distilled if it's heated, but we use demineralized. Again, just talk about the tanks, where to put tanks, how much size you need for various tanks, and then also your concentrate tank as well.
So to answer the producer's question off the bat, Yes, 1,000 taps would be enough taps for a single 8x40 membrane RO. Up until this season, that's about what I was at running my RO, and it worked very well. It allowed me sometimes to not have to boil every day, which I definitely took advantage of when the sap quality allowed me to do that. Obviously, as the season progresses, the sap quality doesn't always allow a person to hold sap, so you have to keep that in mind. But it did allow me to do that, which was nice. So that the first year I had this RO, I had 600 gallons of permeate water storage, which is the recommended minimum. It works, but that 600 gallons really is a bare minimum. This year I had a 1,000-gallon tank for storing the permeate water, and I was much happier with that 1,000-gallon tank. That extra 400 gallons made a huge difference as far as allowing me to do a few more things with rinsing the machine and washing the machine, kind of how I changed the wash process up to allow me to get better washes. Like Kevin had said too, so there's other tanks that need to be involved with this. The recommended minimum from us is for every membrane on the RO, you need every 8-inch membrane, you need 500 to 600 gallons of water storage per membrane on the RO. The sap storage is really dependent on how many taps you run and what kind of sap storage you need for your individual operation. Some producers can get by with a gallon of storage per tap. Some producers need much more than that, really depending on what you see for sap flows in your individual operation and how attentive you can be to things. I need to be gone during the day a lot with my operations, so we have lots of sap storage so that things can run all day and we don't have to worry about running tanks over. If you're going to be around home or your sugar bush all day, you can get by with a lot less sap storage because you can start your RO and start your evaporator earlier in the day if things are running hard. Concentrate storage really depends on how you want to run your evaporator. If you have your RO sized to your evaporator, as David had mentioned, you really don't need a ton of concentrate storage in your head tank, and really less to be on the smaller side of that, or at least keeping that tank more towards the empty side is better. That concentrate, especially if it gets to be a little warm, you don't want to keep around for very long because it can go bad fast. High concentrate, I try to run in that 18 to 20% range of my evaporator. That concentrate can go bad in a matter of hours. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that that concentrate is coming out of the RO and flowing into the evaporator at a good pace so that we don't have concentrate sitting around and going bad. And we also need to remember that our concentrate tank is generally elevated in our sugar house, and that's going to be the warmer part of the sugar house. We're generating a lot of heat in that building via the evaporation process. So, thinking about things just so that that concentrate isn't getting overly warm in the tank and going bad in the tank is definitely something to think about. I run a 120-gallon concentrate tank above my evaporator, or a 2x8 evaporator, and usually I'm only running 20 to 30 gallons of concentrate in that tank at a time because we just try not to keep a lot around so it doesn't go bad on us. I also have a pre-concentrate tank, so to get to the high level that I'm running, I send the sap through the RO twice. My pre-concentrate tank is a 600-gallon tank, so that the sap can stay in, that's an insulated tank, and I monitor the temperature of that to make sure that concentrate isn't going bad. But at the same time, the pre-concentrate, I don't want to keep around for very long either. So we run the sap through the RO the first time, and as soon as it gets done running the first time through, I turn it around and send it through the RO the second time, so we don't have that risk of the sap going bad or the pre-concentrate going bad on us. That's something that you definitely want to be cognizant of. It's pretty disappointing to a person if you have that volume of concentrate go bad, because it's could be if you have say 200 gallons of concentrate go bad, that could have been 1,000 gallons of sap at one point in time. That's it's disheartening to a sugar maker to see that happen. I see there's a question here from a gentleman about cooling concentrate and boiling on a more scheduled basis. So I have a large producer that I work with that just installed a cooling tank, and he is very, very happy by doing that. It has allowed him to stretch his boils out to when he needs or has time to boil, and he loves it. And it's something that I think is going to definitely be growing in the sugar making market as far as finding old dairy tanks to cool your concentrate. One thing to think about or remember though is you can actually cool it below freezing point. So you had used the example of 33 degrees Fahrenheit. The producer I'm working with actually cools his concentrate down to 28, and it won't freeze in the bulk tank because of the increased sugar content of the concentrate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it definitely works, and it works well.
Yeah, thank you, Joel, and thank you for the questions coming. One of the things to remember, to go back a little bit to talk about storage is, generally 1 gallon for the flow of the machine. If it's, in this case, if it's a single post, we rate that approximately around 600 gallons an hour of flow. That we generally like permeate to be a starting point at 600 gallons an hour of permeate storage. It's going to take more depending on your woods, and then like a year like this year where we had a lot of warm temperatures, you might need, in this case, like Joel said, you might need more. You might need double that storage because you may have to wash that machine more often. And then sap flow, you're gonna see approximately a gallon per tap per day in a run of sap. Some big days you might see double that. If you happen to be in the woods where you might see over double that. But that's kind of one thing to think about when you're trying to size your machine is, what is my actual sap flow and how long do I want to run that machine, and can I be there? Because that's very important. There is a question here as well that came in, and talking about sending that through twice. Does it darken the syrup, or should I stick to a single pass? David, what do you think about that?
So anytime you pass sap through an RO, you do warm it up. You do concentrate your bacteria just the same as you concentrate your sugar. And it's actually bacteria that creates the color of the syrup. It can be an issue on warm days or late in the season. Usually if you're quick enough, like Joel mentioned, if you're quick enough in turning over that process, it's not a big issue. I work with 2 very large operations in northern New Hampshire, northern Maine that do that. And they both are in a reasonably cold climate. They could store sap early in the season without having it spoil. So they end up making a whole lot of really nice light syrup, even though they're double passing through an RO. So it's specific to your situation as to whether you're going to make darker syrup or not. Definitely, if you make a pre-concentrate, what Joel called pre-concentrate, and you let it sit overnight, or you let it sit for the rest of the afternoon, you let it sits there for 3 or 4 or 5 hours, and then you come back and process it. Yeah, you've just multiplied your chance of making darker syrup.
Yeah, and speaking of color, color as a whole, there's a lot of factors that can affect color. So, I think that RO machines can get pegged as the culprit for dropping color, but generally there's a lot of other factors that can affect color. And then one person here again, spoke about storage and permeate, and to go back to it just real quick, if you have the storage available, you will benefit by saving that permeate, by using that permeate, especially the last half of the season. So thank you for the questions. So to speak a little more, we talked a little bit about kind of starting to get into cleaning. David, you want to just go over just a basic overview of the cycling of, concentrate cycle, rinse cycle, wash cycle, rinse cycle. Can you describe that?
So when we get the chance to help customers set up an RO, we do a lot of valving to go to different tanks. Okay. You got to think that the last time you ran that RO, you washed it and you rinsed it. So depending on the size of your RO, there's a boatload of water in there that has no sugar on it. So when you have raw sap come in and you start up your concentrate cycle to begin concentrating your sap, you got to think about the fact that you're putting out pure water for about, on my HP1, takes me about 10 minutes to get up to the sugar concentration level that I want to save. So in that process of that 10 minutes, I'm on my concentrate cycle. I actually run that back into the raw sap tank until I can test the 8 to 10% that I want. And then I begin saving the concentrate. We run through all our raw sap, boom, raw sap is gone. At that point, you've got to remember that depending on the size of your RO, your pump's full of sugar, your pre-filters are full of sugar, and your membrane's full of sugar. So you got to want to get that sugar out of there. What we're going to do is we're going to stay in the concentrate cycle but we're going to change our feed of the RO from raw sap to permeate. So we're putting demineralized water back in to push the sugar out of that RO. The amount of time you've got to do that depends on the size of the RO, number of membranes. Once your concentrate level is down to an acceptable level, some people stop at 2%, some people stop at 1%, some people go all the way down to 0 and make sure they don't leave any sugar in that machine. Then you're going to go into a rinse cycle. We want to see that rinse cycle on a 1 membrane machine. We want to run that about 10 minutes to make sure we're getting as much sugar out of the machine as possible. From the rinse cycle, assuming you have enough permeate to clean the chemicals back out of your membrane, we'll fill our wash tank and go into a hot water wash cycle with RO soap. It's important to note that on ROs in the past, you had to be very, very careful how much soap you used and how often you soap washed. The ROs that we're making today, wash them with soap every single time. You're not going to hurt the membrane, okay? Once that hot water wash cycle kicks off at about 118, 117, 118 degrees, we go right into a cold water rinse that wants to be that 600 gallons. That's the big rinse. If at any given time during the season, you're challenged on the amount of permeate you have, make sure that last rinse is the big rinse. Don't chance leaving chemicals in the RO.
Yeah, thank you,
Okay.
David. Yep. And, so one of the things that we see throughout the country, are region changes, so depending on what part of the country you're in, you may see different things. Joel, can you explain what you're seeing out west? And then also explain getting through and understanding pH and also like a permeate flow test as well.
So, like David mentioned, a lot of us in the Midwest seem to struggle with mineral buildup in ROs more than you guys do in the Northeast. So we have to do things a little bit differently and do some more steps sometimes to get our machines cleaned up to the way we need to see them. A lot of guys that I work with actually have to do acid washes almost as often as what they do soap washes because we see a lot of mineral buildup in the machine. So a couple things I like to do is one thing that I really like to do is test my permeate pH from time to time and see where I'm at. Personally, I usually don't struggle with mineral buildup in my own operation, but I see some low pH permeate. So I need to, when I do my rinses, I need to obviously run the rinse long enough, like David had said, to make sure the soap is out of the machine. But if I over rinse the machine, I can sometimes cause a little bit lower permeate flows out of my machine when I run concentrate again, because that low pH permeate can tighten that membrane up and I just won't see the water flows coming out that I want to see. So testing your permeate pH sometimes can give you some clues as to why things may be going on that you don't quite, if you're confused as to why you're not seeing good flows as soon as you get done washing the machine, it may be a low permeate pH issue and that membrane has tightened up a little bit. But it could be a mineral buildup issue, as I talked about before. So if you are washing with soap, rinsing, and the machine just doesn't seem to be clean like you want it to, you'll probably have to do an acid wash. And the process for an acid wash is very similar to the process for a soap wash, but you need to do a soap wash prior to the acid wash, and then you need to do a soap wash also after the acid wash again. So what the acid does is it actually tightens up the pores in the membrane that the water flows through, to help kind of bust and eat that mineral that's built up in that membrane out of there. So if you can envision those pores tightening up, you need to open those pores back up again to get water to flow through. If you would say do your soap wash, then an acid wash, and then go straight to running concentrate or straight to a concentration cycle again, you'll see really poor flows out of the machine, even though the machine is technically clean because that membrane is still tightened down. So to do an acid wash cycle, you desugar, as David had mentioned, do a small rinse, soap wash, another rinse. You probably don't have to do quite as big of a rinse as normal because it will be washed and rinsed twice more. You do that rinse, get the soap out of the machine, fill your wash tank back up again, put acid in the machine, start the machine up, leave it run up to temperature. Then you can leave that acid sit in the machine, depending on how strong you have that acid and which type of acid you're using. We recommend to use citric acid normally, and you can leave citric acid sit in a machine for 24 hours, sometimes even more than that, and kind of leave that acid work for a while. And then after that acid wash again, you want to rinse that acid out of the machine, then go to a soap wash, do your soap wash, get that machine loosened up and ready to flow again. Rinse, and this is where you would want to do that big rinse that David had mentioned to get all of the chemical out of the machine again and your residuals, and then you can go back to concentrating again. When you are washing the machine, you want to hit target pHs to wash the machine properly. Having good pH test strips or a pH meter is definitely critical to running an RO. You're really, without a pH meter or good test strips, you're running the RO blind. So I like to use the 4-color test strips actually. pH meters are good as long as they're calibrated properly often, but you need to keep calibrating them. I like the 4-color test strips myself because they don't come out of calibration, and I am slightly color deficient. So using those 4-color test strips, it's a good visual cue to me. The single color test strips, I know a lot of people struggle, when you're the difference between one number to the next, you don't know, is that 10 or is that 11? 4-color strips are a lot more defined. So those are the strips that I definitely prefer to use. So on the soap wash, you want to get up to 11, but not over 12. The soap we sell is a buffered soap, so it's hard to get it. It's hard to overuse the soap to get it over 12, but you could. So you want to add soap, get it up to the pH that you're shooting for, that 11, 11.5 range. Let the machine run for a while in the soap wash cycle. You should be checking the pH again before you let it get all the way up to temp, because sometimes you'll see a pH drop after those first 10 minutes or so. That water gets all mixed up and it gets dirty kind of the first time. So you want to check that pH again and make sure you're in that 11-ish range that we're shooting for. You leave the machine run up to temperature and then go through the wash cycle as mentioned before. When you're doing an acid wash, we like to get down in the 2 range or pH of 2 to make sure that acid is doing everything it can to get the mineral out of the machine. So 11, but not over 12 on the soap, and 2 or so, but not really much below 2 on the acid wash.
Sure. Yeah. And we have this last question here, and then we're going to shift gears. But so the gentleman here, or person, excuse me, had asked, I assume they meant in the shop, but what would it cost you to do a complete cleaning, and how often should it be regenerated? David, do you want to just answer that one, and then we can move on?
You faded out a little bit there, Kevin. Repeat that,
No,
please.
So what would it cost to have you do a complete cleaning? And what I assume he means, or they mean here, and then how often should it be regenerated?
So we at Leader are happy to clean your membranes. I believe the retail cost on 1 8-inch membrane is $220 right now. That includes permeability testing and testing to see if your membrane is going to pass sugar at the end, and rating your membrane. Really, with the ROs we build, I try and tell all my customers this. The only difference that we do at Leader Evaporator cleaning your membrane versus doing it right in your own machine is that we have employees that stand there and watch it and shift the different things from soap wash to acid wash to soap wash to acid wash to, and we'll run 3, 4, 5, 6 cycles a day through that membrane, whereas most customers that I know of can only do 1. So that's really the only difference. But if you feel you need to do it, we're happy to do it. As long as you have not abused your membrane, it will come back and should last a long time. I've got guys that are running membranes, been running them for 8-9 years now, and it's not an issue. They're still right up there in their permeability test. By the same token, I've got guys that call me up and they ruined their membranes in a year. So anything's possible.
Yeah. Thank you, David. And thank you for the question. I think one of the things that happens where when you don't have an RO machine to getting an RO machine, when you start to listen to everybody talk about cleaning, it's a lot of fear, so I think that when you see the RO machine run and you understand how it affects the process overall, you think about why did I not do this years ago? It's a lot of repetition, and once you get used to past the first time you do it, it's actually pretty easy. So anyway, thank you for the questions. And just a reminder, if you do, looking at all these things that we see, if you have more questions, go right to our website. What we're gonna do is actually schedule time slots And, you know, we live in a new world now where everything is kind of through video. So we want to be able to be personal and answer those questions to all of you, and just schedule that time when it's online. So thank you again for the conversation.